it up for Daddy D.
All right, good morning, guys. So sometimes it's hard to, how would you finish that? What would you jot down today? Sometimes it's hard to what? Go ahead and jot down something that comes to your mind. Sometimes it's hard to do what you do, right? Sometimes it's hard to work where you work. Sometimes it's hard to oversee the people you oversee. Sometimes it's hard to work for the guy you report to. Sometimes it's hard to be a Bulldogs fan. I don't know that. I'm just observing. I'm just observing. Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to be married to who you're married to. If you write that down, I'll guarantee you she's writing that down, right? So sometimes it's hard. Now, if we took a minute and you guys shared around the table what each person wrote down, what would be the result of that? You'd probably know each other a little bit more, right? You'd probably have a little better feel for what some of the guys at the table are going through right now. And so kind of it would actually help the time at the table come to life a little bit. Well, let me encourage you this. As long as I have this microphone in my hand, I'm going to keep saying this, okay? When we go into God's Word, we have to take the time to get to know what it is that we're reading, the people that we're reading about, the emotions that are happening, what's being said, or else we're going to miss a lot of things. I will tell you, in studying Job this summer, I missed a lot of things the first time I read it. And when I slowed down enough to really get to know Job and maybe a little bit more understand these friends and where they're coming from, all of a sudden I realized there was a lot of things in Job where I felt like Nathan was saying to me, you are this man. You are the man, Ron. And so, yeah, there's a lot of applications, and that's true about me today as well. So we're going to jump into some really, really good things today. Quick update on Job. All right, who's Job? Entrepreneur. He's got an apparel business, 7,000 sheep. He's got a transportation business, 3,000 camels. He's got a farming business, 500 heads of oxen. He's a family man. He's got 10 kids, 7 sons, 3 daughters. Close-knit family. They do a lot together. They celebrate together. They celebrate birthdays together. They live close to each other. They're all involved in this business. It's tight, right? He's a spiritual leader. He sacrifices for his kids. Every time there's a gathering, each kid gets a sacrifice. So in case there's something that they did wrong, he wants to make sure there's nothing that's going to interfere with their relationship with God. He's close to his wife. He leads her when he's actually at a very tough moment. As Eliphaz starts talking, we find out that he's also very involved in the community and with his employees. Eliphaz says, hey, you're the guy, when people were down, you would lift them up. You would encourage them. When they didn't know what to do, you were the guy that told them, hey, come on, think like this, act like this, do like this. You sympathize with people. So God called him the greatest man in the East. Well, what happened to him? In one quick instant, he lost everything. 4 messengers came, and he found out he lost his apparel business. Lightning came out of the sky, and all the sheep and all the shepherds were fried on the sight. As that guy was talking, he found out that he lost his transportation business. The Chaldeans came in 3 different bands, stole all the camels, killed all the camel drivers. Only one guy, the only guy that was there to say that. As he was still talking, he found out that he also lost his farming business. The Sabaeans came, took all of his tractors, his oxen, killed all the farmers. This only one guy came to tell him, I'm the only guy left. And as he was talking, the worst that he could hear, big windstorm came out of nowhere. Kids were still celebrating the oldest son's birthday in his house. The house imploded. They're all dead. I'm the only one left. And so, why did this happen? What happened to him was unbelievable. Why did it happen? We're told it. He's not told it. As we read the story, his friends weren't told, but we know why it happened. It was a wager. Satan said, if you take all this stuff, God, I know this is your man. You're telling me to consider him. But if you took all his stuff, you'll find out he doesn't really love you. He loves your gifts. He loves your stuff. Take the stuff and see what's happened. He's a whole lot more like me than you think he is. He's about him. And so at the end of chapter 1, after all this stuff is taken, the only one cursing God is Satan. And then in chapter 2, when there's a second scene in heaven where Satan says, yeah, but if you touch him, he will then curse you. You touch his body, he will curse you. So God takes wager number 2 and allows him to do it. And Job's wife says, go ahead and curse him. And he says, babe, that's not you. You're talking like one of the foolish women. That's not you. And he tells her, God gives and God takes away. Should we just take the evil and not the good? What great thinking, what great theology, right? So there's where we're going to pick up the story today. Probably a couple of months have gone by. Job is in the burning dump outside the city. It's where they burned the garbage. It's also where they put people who were diseased, because the flame, the fire, would hopefully burn that disease away, or at least keep anybody else from catching it. So he's covered from head to toe with boils, pussy, oozing, hurting, itching, painful boils. In chapter 17, when he's talking to the friends a little bit later, it says that God's made a joke out of me. People are coming by and making a joke about me. These are the people he helped. I mean, he's a big guy in the community, and they're walking by and they're making a joke about him. And they're spitting on him. So, word gets out of what's happening with Job, and 3 good friends decide they're going to come and see Job. So they coordinate their calendars. You know, in those days, you know how long it took to travel. You know how long it took word to get out, right? So there's been some time that's gone by while Job's out there breaking glass, taking some of the stuff in the garbage, finding something scraping and skin. And then go ahead and go to your our new bifold. Do you like it? We're going with one. We're one thing, so we're going to give you one thing to go home for instead of 2. So instead of having 2 table cards, we're going with one bifold, all right? So go ahead and look at it. Here's where we pick up the story. It's in Job chapter 2:11. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of this adversity that had come upon him, they came each one from their own place, and they made an appointment together to come to sympathize and comfort him. That's a good goal. That's a great mission, right? So when they come, they see him, and they tear their robe. They can't even recognize him because of what he looks like with these boils covered. And then they sat there for 7 days and just sat there in silence as he was moaning and groaning and in pain. Didn't say a word, just got around him. And then Job in chapter 3, which we looked at last time, when he opens his mouth, he questions 4 things. He says to these guys, why was I born? How does this make any sense? Everything I've done is gone. Why was I even conceived? Why didn't God stop that? My purpose here, my kids are gone. Everything I've done is vanquished and gone. Why does it even make sense that I was ever here? Or why wasn't I at least stillborn? If I was stillborn, I'd be with the kings right now. He had an eternal sense. God puts that in our heart. So he had this eternal sense, at least I'd be with the kings right now. And then he concludes by saying, why does God, when people suffer the way I suffer, why does he even keep us here? I don't get it anymore. This time on earth, I don't get it anymore. Why doesn't he just take me? And so that's where he's at. Now his friends hear that, and something clicks inside of them. And for some reason, they came for the purpose of sympathizing and comforting, right? Let's take a real quick look at the exchange. I pulled out some verses of, kind of key things of what each of these guys said, and then how Job responded. Now, let me just say this. When you look at the 3 guys, they came from it from 3 slightly different angles, okay? So Eliphaz came from it from a place of experience. I've learned this. I've observed this, he said. I've seen this. Job, I've seen all this stuff. Why don't you learn from this? People who are suffering, they have sin in their life. That's what my observation is. All right, then when Bildad speaks, he comes from it kind of close, but a little bit different. He comes it from tradition. Job, go back through the ages. Let the aged speak. Let's go back some generations. Let's learn from the generations. Remember the flood? Right? This was just shortly after the flood. When you don't do good, God does bad things to you. That's where he was coming from. And then Zophar, he just assumed. He just came from a place of assumption. He goes, Job, this is pretty easy. Don't you get it? You've obviously done something wrong. Therefore, God did this to you. So in their world, they had one hypothesis, and it was this. Suffering comes from sin. Job is suffering. Job sinned. That's the place they were coming from. So this is how the conversation digresses. Eliphaz starts out, will you be patient and let me say a word? For who could keep from speaking out? A wise man wouldn't answer with such empty talk. You are nothing but a windbag. Wow. So Job, flip the page over. I'm gonna go back and forth from what Eliphaz says, how Job responds. So if it's open up, it's on the inside. Here's what Job says to Eliphaz. If my misery could be weighed and my troubles put on the scales, they would outweigh all the sands of the sea. Eliphaz, I just buried 10 kids. You see the graves, they're not even grown over with yet. I just lost all my kids. I just lost all my employees. I just lost my business. I lost everything. Look at me. Don't I have the right to complain? Don't wild donkeys bray when they find no grass and oxen bellow when they have no food? My brothers, you proved as unreliable as a seasonal brook. You have given no help. Teach me, and I'll keep quiet. Show me what I've done wrong. Do you think your words are convincing when you disregard my cry of desperation? Look at me. Would I lie to your face? Stop assuming my guilt. I have done no wrong. Do you think I'm lying? Look at me. Come on, guys. Look at me. Now, these three friends hear that, and the next guy's lined up, loaded for bear. We're not going to have time to go through these one by one, but take some time and look at this and catch the emotion of it. When it gets to the end in Zophar, look at what Zophar says. Shouldn't someone answer your torrent of words? Is a person proven innocent just by a lot of talking? Should I remain silent while you babble on? When you mock God, shouldn't someone make you ashamed? An idiot will become intelligent when the foal of a wild donkey is born a man. He looks at Job and says, you're such an airhead idiot. You'll become intelligent when some donkey gives birth to a man. Wow. Take the gloves off, right? So, there's a lot going on here, right? Questions. One question I have is, how could the friends end up here when they started out with a mission that said, we're coming to sympathize and comfort Job? Let's set our calendars, let's go and sympathize and comfort our friend. And then this is what they brought. They had a great mission. It's important, guys, in life that we write a mission statement. It really is. I mean, you get it in business, right? We have a mission statement. When I'm asked why, it's because it helps us stay on course. When a lot of things come our way, we go back and say, is this in accordance with our mission statement? Same thing's true of our life. I was encouraged when I was part of Gail's R12 True Group to write a personal mission statement, so I did. I still go back to it. I went back to it this week because I had to make a decision on my time. And so I reviewed my mission statement, and it helped me make a really good decision on what I'm going to do with my time during a week in December. Do you have a mission statement? If you don't, I really encourage you to develop one for yourself. It's good to have a mission statement because there's so many things that'll pull us and distract us, and a week becomes a month, becomes a year, and pretty soon some years go floating by, right? Now, it's one thing to have a mission statement, and it's another thing to refer back to it. Maybe you've written a mission statement. When's the last time you looked at it? Are you living your life right now by the mission statement you wrote when you got quiet before God and said, help me develop this? We need to be men of purpose. We're needed, guys. We're needed. We're needed in our families. We're needed in our neighborhoods. We're needed everywhere that we are, in our work. Be a man of mission, but know what your mission is and don't get pulled off of it. All right, where did Job go wrong? We're going to cover that next week. Job's discovery, what was it, and is it our discovery? It's a big one. It is a big one. And where he went wrong and why God let him hang on to get to that last 10% is what we're going to go to next week. So, the power of the tongue. Let me suggest an assignment to you. Go take another look at Job. Read through these 34 chapters of this exchange and what the friend said to them. Box out when the friend makes a big statement about God. Then ask yourself if you agree with it. Chances are you're going to agree with almost all of them because they were dead on in a lot of things that they said about God. Here's an example. Eliphaz says, Job, if you bury your gold in the dirt, then God will become your gold. Assumption, you didn't bury your gold in the dirt. Therefore, God hasn't been your gold. Therefore, he's done this to you. Now, what Eliphaz said, I want to talk about that. I want us to do a series on that. Men, if we bury our gold in the sand, God will become our gold. Let's bury our gold in the sand, really. And let's let God become our gold. I want to do a series on that, but God got angry at Eliphaz for saying that. So teacher beware, right? When we teach and when we hear a teacher, we really need to pay close attention to whether the application is correct. And God expects us to do that. That's why we need to spend time in the Word ourselves. That's why we need to develop our theology. Be men of the Word and study the Word. What these guys said were dead on. Their application couldn't be farther off. So the power of the tongue, we could spend a whole series on that, right? But here's one of my takeaways, because what I realized is that with my wife, okay, go ahead and look at that first verse, Proverbs 15, verse 4. These guys used their tongue to lash Job to pieces because they were convinced that he had sin in his life, and that's what he had to deal with. And so they cut him in half. Job was emotional. Job was depressed physically. He was hurting, pain, emotionally. He was spent, unsure, asking. Spiritually, he said, I'm not at ease. He was depressed. So sometimes our wives tend to be more emotional than us, right? I will tell you where I've been guilty and where I've been like Job's friends in my life, and one place is with my wife. I don't think I ever really saw that like this. Here's what Solomon said: the soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. Don't crush your wife's spirit. When she gets emotional, listen to her. Help her through it. Don't be the fix-it guy. We tend to be that way, guys, right? We want to fix things. Be a little softer with her. Be soothing with your tongue. Maybe your theology is correct. Maybe your application isn't. Maybe she needs a hug. Maybe that's true of a friend of yours. I would tell you where I blew it with a friend. Go down to Colossians 4, verse 6. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. I had a friend who went through a very tough thing with his son. When he told me about it, I gave him a very theologically correct response of how he should deal with his son. You know what I missed? The pain he was going through. So you know what he did? He went like that. I get why he went like that, because to him, I was kind of like being Job's friends. Theologically correct, wrong application at the time. Friendships are so important. Friendships are so fragile. Use your tongue to build up, to be gracious. Yes, to speak truth, but speak it in a loving way. Why was God mad at his friends? What did God say to his friends? God's response to Job's friends. Look at this, Job 42, verse 7. After the Lord had finished speaking to Job, he said to Eliphaz, I am angry with you and your two friends, for you have not spoken accurately about me as my servant Job has. Where did they blow it? I'll give you two illustrations, and then we're going to send it to the table. So, everybody knows baseball, right? If you play the game of baseball, it all wraps around home plate. Home plate is 17 inches wide. Doubleday decided that, right? Whether it's Little League, high school, college, pro, you play baseball 17 inches wide. That means the pitcher has to throw that within 17 inches from the knee to the chest, right? And the whole game centers around home plate and playing it within that dimension. Now, if your son comes along and he wants to play high school ball, but that's a little bit narrow for him, will they umpire change it to 24 inches so your son can pitch for the high school team? Ridiculous, right? Now, would we say that Doubleday didn't get it back then? He didn't understand our times. Our times are give a ribbon to everybody, so we need to change the rules and spread that out a little bit so that anybody can play the game of baseball, and we'll change the width of home plate by what somebody else wants. Also crazy thinking, right? But you know that's what's going on today, right? In the church. I want to widen home plate. Because what God said back then, that don't apply today, does it? That don't make sense anymore. Guys, we got to be aware of that, okay? What makes sense in baseball and sports to protect the integrity of the game is also true about our God who never changes. He has rules, and he has us play a game a certain way for our own good, for the enjoyment of life, for the enjoyment of the game. Now, Job's friends got that, right? Here's what they didn't get. That's the concept they got. They were speaking about the concept of home plate. And they were very critical of anything outside of home plate. And they were kind of assuming and condemning of anybody outside of home plate. As they looked at his life and just connected the X, the Y, the Y. There's also the principle of the slingshot. Now in business, we get this. When Sandy and I went around this year, seeing our stores, I asked the question, we find something really good about their store, and we say, how did that come about? And it's always the same principle. They tell me something that they went through that was really tough, but because they went through that, they learned something really important, and therefore they put it to work, and now they're where they're at in their store because of that time back there. It's the principle of the slingshot. If you take a slingshot and you want to project, you got to stretch back, right? When we're being stretched, it's not comfortable. It doesn't feel good. But we have a God who knows that he wants to take us farther. That's what he was doing with Job. He was stretching Job a little bit. Satan lost in chapter 2. It was over. God could have lifted the boils in chapter 3. He left them. He left them. He was going after something with Job. He's going after the last 10%. Job, we've gone this far. We're going to go the rest of the way now. I'm going to mine something out of you. Yeah, I'm going to stretch you a little bit right now. But it's because I'm going to launch you farther, which we're going to talk about next week. That principle is still true today. That's a biblical principle. It's one that how God works with us. That's why James tells us, count it all joy when you're being stretched. Because it's going to work character, perseverance. Do you believe that? Do you live that? That's the God that we serve. That's where Job's friends missed it. Don't be a friend that misses that. Your friend is getting stretched, comfort him, encourage him, let him know that principle. Now, in closure, before I send it to the table, Job's friends could have been right if there was sin, right? So we're addressed. Paul tells us what to do with that. The only time we judge a brother is when there's clear sin. And when there is clear sin, guys, we got to help our brothers take it out, right? When there's something that's real clear and someone that we know just saying, I don't care, I'm going to live life the way I want to live, well, then we need to talk about that as a brother with him and say, no, start living the game back. There's 17 inches here. Start living the game correctly. But most of the time, you don't know. Don't assume it. Assume this, God's stretching. And then you can speak properly. Assume that with your wife. She's being stretched. Love her properly. All right, let's talk about it. Let's go to the tables. You know, when I was reading this, I came across kind of a really interesting story. So a guy tells a story about this guy's wife is ready to turn 60 years old. And so he says, babe, what would you like for your birthday? Above everything else, take off all the boundaries, what would you want? And she said, I'd love to be 6 again. And so he thinks, I got this, right? So on her birthday morning, he wakes her up and says, we're going to go on an adventure. So he takes her to IHOP and buys her one of those pancakes with the smiley face and the whipped cream. And then they go off to Six Flags, and they spend 5 hours going on absolutely every ride that's there and eating cotton candy and having a blast. They leave there. He takes her to McDonald's, gets her a Happy Meal and a big chocolate shake. And then they go to the theater and go see an animated movie, and he blows her up with popcorn and jujubes and M&Ms and all kinds of stuff. They get home, and she kind of stumbles in the door. They collapse in bed, and he says, well, babe, how was it being 6 again? And she opens one eye and says, I meant my dress size. So he totally missed the point, right? And, you know, so Job's friends, that they totally missed the point. They had a point to sympathize and comfort, and it's important that we don't miss the point when we got guys around us that are hurting. Yeah, that's a good mission to have. That's a great place to go, right? So let me ask you a critical thinking question. These guys came to give, right? To give of their time, to give their friendship, to try to give some comfort, and then they kind of missed it. But here's a critical thinking question. What's the New Testament standard for giving? What's the New Testament command for giving? Cheerful giver, that's right. That's right. You know, we have a standard in the Old Testament was 10%. Take a look going down, it says closing thoughts. Giving to others. Each one should give what he has decided in his heart to give, not out of regret or compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And yes, that applies to our finance, and yes, that applies to our time, and yes, that applies to our talents, and yes, it applies to all that. And as Gail Jackson says, the good news is we get to decide what that is from our heart. The bad news is we have to answer to God for what we decide. right? So let me encourage you in this area. This is a neat time of year that we're coming into. Sandy and I, every year, about this time, we start praying that God will bring someone into our lives that we can help in a really meaningful way, and then share with them the story of Christmas and what Jesus did for us, right? And so this year, for whatever reason, I started praying early, actually in September. And I had a couple people in mind, already in mind, someone from my doctor's office. And I didn't tell Sandy who it was yet. But then on October 4th, I was at a gas station. And I was pumping gas, and his car pulled up. And in the back seat, this little girl, 7 years old, with an angel-like face, waves at me. And so I looked, and I waved back. And she had a little brother next to her, and he waved at me, so I waved. And then I looked at the front seat, and the mother had her head on the steering wheel crying. I thought, wow, how separated could that be, right? So she opened up her purse and took out 4 singles and gave it to a kid in the front seat that's 13 years old to go prepay for some gas. And so I kind of felt like God nudged me, so I went up and I said, hey, look, I'm gonna buy you a tank of gas, right? And she goes, no, you don't have to do that. And I said, no, I'm gonna buy you a tank of gas. So I slid the credit card and was pumping the gas, praying about what I should say to her. And then she got out of the car when she heard the thing click off, and she was crying, and she said, this is so helpful. Tough time right now. It's my little girl's birthday today. She's 7. And I said, oh, it's your birthday. So we went inside and let her pick a treat and give her something for her brothers. And when we're walking out, while we were in the store, I was just praying, God, show me what to do. And so we got outside, and I said, hey, what's your biggest challenge right now? What's going on? And what's your biggest need? And she went, brrr. And when she got done, she said, I've never said that much to a stranger before. And she apologized. And inside of me, everything resisted doing anything else for her, because there's a lot of poor people. There's a lot of people in her condition. I gave her a tank of gas. I gave her a little bit of money, and I walked to my car. And then I stopped, and I looked at her. She was getting ready in the car, and I said, hey, my wife and I are going to pay your rent this month. She was afraid she was going to get kicked out of her house, right? And she's like, again, she said, no, you don't have to do that. I said, no, we're going to do that. So I said, what's your landlord's name? And I was writing out the check. And she came over, and she said, last night, I put my kids to bed, and I turned on worship music, and I started praying that God somehow would send me somebody to help in this situation. And she had told me that a lot of people were telling her what to do, but nobody was really explaining how to do it. And so I said, well, don't let anybody ever tell you that God doesn't answer prayers. So she took the check, and she's passing it around in the car, and she looked at me, and she's crying and laughing, saying, the kids are passing the check around. And she looked in and said, see, God answers our prayers. And so I drove off, and I prayed for her that somebody would pick it up from here, right? I was ready to get on the freeway, and this does not happen to me very often, okay? But I felt almost like a voice said, turn around. And I thought, what else are we supposed to do here, right? And so I turned around, and I went back, and the hood was up on her car. And so I pulled around to the side, and I said, do you need a jump or something? And she said, no, this car won't start when there's not enough radiator fluid. It's got a sensor in it. And she was laughing and crying. She said, I'm just so happy right now, and I'm just thanking God. And so when I was pulling up to the car, this is what I felt like the Holy Spirit whispered to me. There's 3 kids in that car. I have a plan for every one of them. They need help. Help them. So I said, hey, if you're comfortable, why don't you give me your phone number? My wife mentors young ladies, and maybe she can help kind of mentor you through what you're going through right now. She said, see, that's the other thing I was praying for. So we took her number, and Sandy called her 2 days later and to get a little bit of an update. And the next day, I was watching NFL football, and I felt nudged. So I sent an email out to a few guys in this room, told them the story, and just said, look, guys, I don't know if there's something else we should do for this girl. I kind of think that she needs a car, to help her get a job. Maybe if we can rally together and do that, we could really help change somebody's life. About 18, 20 guys in this room responded, and we bought her a car. Sandy called her and said, hey, Kimberly, how's it going? She goes, well, my car just got chain pulled into my driveway. I'm trying to figure out how to get my kids to school tomorrow. So he said, well, we're bringing you a car. So she started laughing and crying. We tried to call her back, and she didn't hear the phone ring. And when she finally did, she said, I have the worship music on so loud with my kids right now that we couldn't quite hear. I'm going to shorten this up, but what ends up happening is her brother-in-law gets baptized, her sister gets baptized. We got just the exact amount, enough money in to help her get propane in her house. Her electricity stays on. She has a job today with that car. She gets up at 1 o'clock in the morning delivering newspapers and then comes back with her kids. And she Ubers and does Lyft during the day. So, and and we're helping her establish goals, write mission statements, different things like that. And she's a thirsty person for it. Now, I say all that for this reason. Thank you guys in this room to have that kind of heart. And the guys who gave towels to Bill, thank you for doing that. And Bill's going to be going down to the mission the day after Thanksgiving. Is that right? On that Friday. If you guys want to go down, if you want to take your kids down, you want to take your grandkid down, it'd probably be a good experience to do that. We collected 270 some towels. That's about 50 short where we really wanted to be. If you missed that and you want to do that, you can still get them to Bill before Thanksgiving. And maybe we'll get the number up to where we're hoping to get. But during this season and always, in your reactions with other people, we're all surrounded by this. And Jesus told us the poor will always be with us. Has he taught us how to be generous, right? And so develop a giving, sensitive heart and give what's needed to the people around you. When we start doing that, as tough as we may have it, God's wired us that way. You'll have joy like you don't experience in any other way when you learn how to give generously. And this is what we know. God loves a cheerful giver. So, yeah, I think God, if for no other reason than 20 guys said, I'm going to do this, God loved that. I'm telling you that. He absolutely loved that. So, guys, as we grow together and we nudge each other and we spur each other on, let's spur each other on in this area as well. And live life. And let's impact some people. You know, that was one incident where 20 guys, we got, maybe 90 guys in here this morning. Let's have 90 guys looking for opportunity right now. Let's see what happens. And then maybe you can share that stuff around the table. All right, we're going to have one more week on Job next week. Job made a huge discovery. The question is it our discovery? And we're going to look into how God kind of drew Job to that. And in Job, God speaks about God. So we're going to pack that a little bit. We'll see you next week. Close at your table. Thanks, guys.
One Thing for Men meets at Cabernet Steakhouse in Alpharetta, Georgia on Friday mornings from 7 to 8 a.m. If you live in the Atlanta area or visit the area on Friday, we would love to have you join us in person. And if you have been blessed by this message, please consider supporting One Thing for Men online.